Hi, my name's Tegan. I'm the jewelry making expert here at Jacobs Trading. If you haven't heard of us before, make sure you check out the description below, and that's going to lead you to some information about our website and our online store. Today we're going to be talking about wire wrapping and how to add decorations to a basic bail. Let's get started. So this is a follow-up video on our introduction on how to do a bail, which is the top part of a pendant where the chain goes through. If you missed that video, make sure you check out the description below, and that'll lead you to that video. Be sure to watch that one first if you missed it. Otherwise, what we're going to do now is take that basic bail, and I'm going to show you how to add a bunch of decorations to it. So first we're going to start by introducing you to the supplies that we're using. I've chosen out a selection of stones, but anything that you want to use that has a hole in it is what you can use for this demonstration. If you have a piece that doesn't have a hole, that's going to be a different technique called caging, and we will cover that in future videos. But for today's project, you're going to want a piece that has a hole. The tools that we're going to use are side cutting snips, round nose pliers, and flat nose pliers. Particularly for the sake of when you're doing decorations on your piece, you're going to want to look for a pair of pliers that's flat on the inside that doesn't have any teeth. If you have teeth on your pliers, it's going to leave little dents and specks on the wires. So that's one thing to make sure you watch out for, flat pliers and not toothed pliers. The last thing we're going to use is some wire. What we're using here is an enamel coated copper wire in 22 gauge. If you don't know what size gauges are, we also have a video on that you can check in the description. But for the sake of this video, we're going with that 22 gauge. It's the most basic size for doing this kind of wire wrapping. Here are the couple examples that I've already pre-made, as I'm not going to go over that in the video. Like I said, there's a link to that. And let's get started on this. So here I have my bail that I've already done on the top of the wire, and then I have a piece of wire that's probably about 10 inches long. This distance can vary depending on what you're doing, on how complex the piece is. Less decoration, obviously less wire. More decoration, going to take more wire. So that's something to be conscious of, is how much you're going to need. That you'll get with practice as to the kind of designs you're doing. You'll find out how much wire you're going to need. So we're going to feed that through the top hole of your piece. And you're going to want to make sure you're aware of which side is your front and which side is your back. This piece is pretty similar on both sides, so I'm not really going to worry about it. But if you had a side that was a favorite, make sure you're aware of which way that is, so you're working on the right side and you're not doing it backwards. So I just have that through the hole, and we're going to lift that up, just like we did in the first video, kind of trying to match the shape. I'm going to lift it straight, so that we have that shape. If I pull it out, you can see it's now kind of a rounded shape that fits that groove. And we're going to pull that up. So when we finished it, we started going around and wrapping back up. This time, I'm just going to go underneath it once just to anchor it, just to make sure it stays there. And now we can do anything we want with this piece. So we have all this extra wire for our decoration. I mean, technically, if I just wrapped it a couple times, it's secure and it's good the way it is. But it's kind of plain, so we're going to add some fun. My favorite thing to do is these swirls that I have here on the tops. This one's kind of an open coil. This one's a little bit tighter. I find them a very timeless, classic look. So let's get started with that. This, I don't really need as much wire as I have on this one. So I'm actually going to clip it down to maybe about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. If you do wind up with extra wires, do keep those on hand. Sometimes you can actually add them back on, which I'll show you how to do in a bit, and still use up some of that extra wire. So when you're starting a coil, you're going to begin with those round nose pliers, and you're going to go to the very, very tip of both the wire and your pliers. And you're going to grab on to as little as you can and coil that around. So it kind of creates a little hook shape where you have a lifted kind of like flat spot. Then you're going to go back with your flat nose pliers and curve it a little harder. So I'm literally just kind of squishing that little circle so that it tucks it in, so we get a tighter actual circle instead of a curve and a line. So we're just getting rid of that line. This is the center of your coil, so we're kind of working in reverse by having it start in the center and coiling in, as opposed to starting from the top of the pendant. This is where it comes in handy to have flat pliers as opposed to toothed ones. So I'm physically going to pinch this whole thing and give it a little turn. So every time I do a turn, we're just tightening our coil. As you're doing this, you can determine how tight you want it. You can leave it open and loose, or you can have it right flush. If you want it touching, then a lot of times I'll kind of tap it like I'm going side to side, and I'll keep pinching my circle a little tighter. And that'll do a tighter coil where they're physically almost touching if you want. I like it sometimes open, so I'll keep going around and around as I create that coil. I don't worry too much about how it looks on the piece as I'm doing it, because it doesn't matter until I get all the way up to the top. So I don't worry about what that part's working on. I'm just focusing on trying to get that coil nice and even as I go. You don't want to wind up with any like weird little like bumps and shapes. If you do, kind of flatten those out as you go with those round nose pliers. Once you're closer to the top, you can start trying to aim this thing back down on your piece, so I'm kind of curving it onto it. Continuing to adjust that circle as we go. It's kind of a tedious process, so you don't want to rush it. Go nice and slow. Don't go too fast, particularly when you're first practicing. If you go too fast, you're going to get kind of a lumpy circle. So go slow, methodical. Get this up a little higher. I got just a bit of a bump on the bottom here, so we're just trying to get rid of that. Okay, bear with me here. There we go. So I'm just pushing it up, and there is your most basic swirl for finishing a pendant. Last thing, you can open these guys up for decoration. There we go. So we're going to show you another one now on how to add some swirls to more of the body of the pendant. So for this next piece, I've already attached the top because we've shown that to you. Now we're going to work on going kind of around the body. So when I'm curving my wire, I'll usually kind of hold it down with these fingers and use my index finger to create kind of like a sweep. So it's kind of like curling your hair, where you know, you're kind of making the curl to begin with. Even though I'm stretching it straight, it'll leave a nice curve to the edge. So that's how I get kind of more sweeping edges, is I hold the wire down here and I'm pressing with my index finger, and it's gonna kind of pull on it as I go, and it creates nice soft edges. So that's how I'm gonna create a sweep across the front of this. And now I'm gonna wrap around. So you don't have to be in any one direction. You don't have to only stay on the top of your pendant. You can go from the front to the back, up, down, any direction that you want. You can even go back through this hole. So if it seemed relevant to do that, coming up through the back, up, out, you can go any direction. So we've gone down across the front on this piece. I'm gonna hook it up to the top, anchor it around once, and then I'm gonna come back down and go the other way. So I'm just gonna kind of pull tightly just to get it back on that side. I'm gonna do that sweep, except now I'm gonna do it the other way. So I'm gonna use my thumb now instead, and I'm pulling on that wire, and it kind of smooths it out, so it makes it nice and easy to have a nice clean line there. Now we're gonna go the opposite way, around the back up to that top, anchor it off. So I like continuing to pop back up to the top or through a hole in order to anchor it so it doesn't come undone, because as you're doing it, things can kind of move and groove. So you always wanna have an anchor just to hold it down. So sometimes pieces don't go as planned. So as I was doing this, I pulled and I got a nice big sweep on this side. This side really tightened up and it went a little short. There's no right or wrong when it comes to wire wrapping. So just because it didn't look how I planned, which was even and nice on level on both sides, that's okay. You know what? Nobody's gonna know. So we're gonna carry on with this as is. Maybe, you know what? Maybe it was meant to be that way. So I'm actually gonna straighten this out and we're gonna have a line. So instead we got a curve and a line. Now I'm kind of getting the idea that I want to decorate this wire instead. So since we now have a line instead of a curve, something you can do is not just with the loose wire, you can actually decorate the wire that's already on your piece by using your tools. So if you I'm using my round nose pliers, and I'm going to go on here and simply open, loose, turn back and forth. And that's going to create a wave here instead. Oop, this part you got to kind of hold on nice and tight for, because sometimes it moves around. Kind of hard to get the right angle to the camera. There you go. So it's going to create a little swirl instead. So it's just another form of decoration that you can do on your piece. Now we got to kind of finish it off. We don't want to just leave a wire hanging like this. We could do another little coil like I've done on some of these guys, reverse coil it down. You could even keep going. I still have wire, so maybe I want to do a little curl here. So instead of doing that full coil, I've pulled it around into a half circle, and I'm just gonna kind of wrap it around slowly, using my thumb to push on it so it follows through. So now I got a little swirl there. I'm gonna come back across the top here, once again, that anchor point. You never wanna just leave mostly like an open wire, so I wouldn't wanna leave this down like this and just say, hey, look, it's done, because this is going to catch on clothing. So you want practical pieces for people. You don't want something that's going to snag on and be kind of annoying, catching their hair, poke them. So typically I avoid open ends. So I'm back up that neck here, wrap it around once or twice, then we're going to clip that off and finish it. So we'll clip that off, grab our flat nose pliers, and just like in the first video, I told you about tapping, not pinching and rolling. You're just going to keep tapping that little end down until it's gone. And there's our finished piece. You can open up those ends. So lastly, I'm going to show you how I did a piece kind of like this, where we have kind of more involved swirls and curls right directly on the front face of the piece as opposed to just these coils up top. So let's get started. I'm going to walk you through it here. So we have it at the top, just like I was talking about with swirling those edges. So I'm going to kind of prep my wire by giving it a nice curved edge. It got kind of a lump there. So you can kind of do it a few times until you feel like you got a nice sweeping curve. So you see I have a nice easy palette here to work with, nice smooth edge. So I'm going to come down. You don't necessarily have to swirl across the back. This one I did, but you don't have to. You can just stay just on the front of your piece if that seems best. So you can kind of have a nice curve on one side. Maybe I want to go the other way. There's no rules to this, as I said earlier. It can be anything you want. It doesn't have to be a specific pattern. A lot of times I don't premeditate what my piece looks like. I just let it flow and my hands tell me what it's going to look like. Often I get customer requests for things and they want it to look a specific way, and I just can't do that. I have to do it as I do it. So I can kind of get an idea from a customer. So maybe this one I do decide I want to go around back. I'll have to ask a customer, you know, do you want it more plain or do you want it more fancy? So as you can see, I'm coming up to the top here and I'm anchoring that off. And pretty much that's all I will get from people is if they want it plain or fancy. So there we did a nice curve across one side, a swirl in the middle, and a curve up to the top. But you know what, this seems a little plain and I kind of have a little kink here, so I'm gonna try and straighten that out a little bit. Or you know what, if you ever wound up with a weird spot, like say I had a really harsh kink here that I didn't like, maybe I'm gonna cover that up. Maybe I'm gonna throw a nice little extra swirl on top of that. So just because you wound up with a little mistake that you don't like, you can cover it up in other ways. So like this one I showed you, those little wavy parts. You can also come over top of something and go over it again. So I'm gonna accentuate this nice little shape that I have there, and I'm gonna follow it up again. So we got another little pass there. And you know what, I'm actually gonna follow my wire across the back here and pass it back up. So a lot of times I like kind of concentric shapes where they follow each other, but that's just my personal preference. Some people like really abstract, some people like nice wild designs. I tend to like simplistic, but everyone has their own taste. So this is kind of doing something funky, so I'm gonna go back in with my tool. I do the majority of my work with just my hands, but I do occasionally use tools to straighten things out. So we got kind of some waves here, so I'm just gonna straighten out those waves so we can get the shape that I want, which is more of a curve. And then we're back at the top and we're gonna finish this off. Once again, tapping that around. So that's the piece we ended up with, but you know what? I still wanted some more fanciness to it. So as I said earlier in the video where you can take cutoffs, this is another thing we can do to add more to it. So typically I like starting in the middle of the wire. So I'm going to start just in the dead center and I'm gonna pass that around on the neck of my pendant, going in opposite directions. So sometimes working with a piece that's added can be a little tricky because it tends to wanna spin and move around. So that's kind of one thing that can be a little difficult for you. So if you're just starting out, maybe don't play with this quite yet until you get used to working with wire. I'm pulling on both ends just to try and tighten it up as much as I can. Once it's on there, see it's a little less movement. Now I have more wire to play with, so I can do more things with this. I'm going to maybe have one coil across the top. You know what, I'm gonna keep going with this here. Let's see. It's too tight. So you gotta kind of try things on, and sometimes, you know what, I put it on and I go, you know what, I don't like that. Maybe I'll just cut it off. And you can take it off. I think we're just gonna go with this one wire as opposed to adding too much, because now I'm seeing it on here. I don't actually want that much more. So I think we're going to get rid of this guy up at the top. So I anchored it off, pulled it around a little bit more. We're gonna clip that, tuck that extra wire, and work with just this extra piece because I think it's all we need. So sometimes if you get stuck, see I have this wire here now, there's one more exception to my rule where I said don't end with this on the front. There's one little trick you can do if you don't want to end it at the top. You can take this, you can take your tool, roll the end, just like we were doing those coils at the front. We're gonna make that nice tight little circle. So this is gonna do is make sure your piece is not gonna catch on anything. It's gonna be a softer edge. So we're gonna have that little coil to end. And you just still don't wanna leave it sticking up, oops, because otherwise this is still gonna catch on things. So what you're gonna wanna do is find a place to tuck it underneath something else that isn't going to let it pull up. So I'm gonna kind of tuck it underneath this one, if it will behave. Come on, oops. As I'm messing up some of my other wires. You know what, that's not gonna work. What we're gonna do is tuck it in here. There, so we tucked it underneath this wire because it was tighter. And now it's underneath here, which means it's not gonna catch. So our end wire actually ended here as opposed to the top, but now it's not gonna snag on anything. So that's the last one I have to show you. So as you can see, these designs can be as fancy or as simple as you want them to be. Don't put any pressure on yourself when you're trying to do this. Have fun with it and just go with the flow. That's all we have for you today, guys. If you have any questions about what we covered, be sure to drop a comment below and we can get that answered for you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that like button. That helps us greatly. You can also subscribe for more videos. We have new content coming out every single week and we cover a lot of different topics. Hope you enjoyed that. Have a great day, guys.